My name is Art Anderson. I'm an attorney here in Dallas, and my mother is Betty Anderson, who was, I guess, president of the league for the state and also two-time president of the Lubbock chapter of the league. We moved to Lubbock in '61, didn't really know anybody. And so the first organization my mother actively got involved in was the local league. 6 years later, she was the president of the local league. So my mother was I think the state president from 75 to 79. And at that point in time, I was in college. So my interactions at that point were not that frequent. I've heard a lot in my life about her being a good mentor, and I think a good example for how you should approach civic issues in a global way. In other words, her skill set was broad. You could tell she was compassionate, she was passionate, she had the ability to marshal people and create coalitions to get results, all of which are great. I don't know how she was able to do all the things she did in 24 hours a day, but she did. Nonpartisanship means something different today than it did back then. If nonpartisanship means not supporting any particular political party and trying to support civic discourse in general and achieve goals that, regardless of party, would be important. An example would be the Equal Rights Amendment. The Equal Rights Amendment should not be a party issue. It should not have been a party issue back then. For the most part, it wasn't. Kind of turned into one over time. The CHIPS program for providing funds for low-income households and children. At that point in time, I think it was 87 or 89, and the federal government was going to basically provide 3/4 of these funds to help these kids if the state would just match it with 25%, which seems like a no-brainer, right? And she formed coalitions to make that happen. And so I think helping lower income folks, helping kids, those shouldn't really be partisan issues. If you look at access to the ballot, getting people to be interested in the civic health of the country, that should not be a partisan issue either. Mother became very close friends with the legislators in West Texas who were Democrats, who also happened to control, I don't know if control's right, were major leaders in the legislature. And that include, Senator Ken Hance, Senator Max Sherman, who later became dean of the LBJ School, Senator Ray Farabee. She was good friends with Representative Pete Laney, who was Speaker of the House for years. And all of those people were different than her, right? But they respected her and were willing to listen to her on what I would call the social justice kinds of issues. And that, I think she did a good job of not overstating her case, making sure that what was proposed was something that they could support, not that you're assuaging to giving up on a particular ideal or goal, but recognizing there is politics, right? And how do you achieve that? And she was really good at that. And so it was funny that I think they had in 2005, they had the League Rally Day, where League of Women Voters come, like a lot of what called lobbying groups, go down to Austin. And, Pete Laney basically said, I'll do whatever Betty Anderson says. on those types of issues. On the civic side and nonpartisanship, she had always had a special interest in redistricting. And so when I was considering what to do for my master's thesis, we talked about it, and I decided that I would basically prepare my thesis on trying to revise the constitutional system here in Texas for redistricting. Now, back then we had some gerrymandering, not like it is today, but it kind of foretold that that might happen. So I had suggested, and Barbara Jordan was my faculty advisor, so she kind of penciled with me with regards to my thesis. But it was basically coming up with more of the nonpartisan methodology to go through redistricting than what was in place at the time. It would have required some constitutional amendments and things like that. And so after that, when I became a lawyer, I actually wrote a law review article that got published on a couple on that issue and the using of technology, because in 1990 is when they first started getting computers actively involved in terms of taking the data from the census and figuring out algorithms on how you can draw lines using criteria. And I remember that the senator who was going to be in charge of the redistricting process, that would have been 91, because census comes out in 90, he actually called me and offered me a job to run the redistricting committee as their counsel. And I decided not to do that. Not sure what would have happened if I'd said yes, but that whole thing on trying to have good government was part of that. And then Senator Ray Farabee, who I was legislative aide for when I was in law school, he would every year sponsor a bill trying to get to take out the election process for the judiciary. In other words, don't elect judges, they should be appointed, because if you elect judges, they've got to be by party, go through the electoral process. And deciding a case or deciding the law really shouldn't be based upon whether you're a Democrat or Republican. And that bill would make it through his committee, then it would go no further because of the fact of the way the politics work. And I actually wrote a law review article on that as well, and both of which got a little bit of attention, but the political realities were they didn't happen. But I still think it's the ideals, right? It's the ideals of we need to figure out ways to make, I think today, discourse and decision making less, partisan may or may not be the right word, but divisive, I think, is the word. And figure out ways to do that, which I know is a huge task. But if you give up, then kind of where are we, right? She helped to find office space in Austin for the league. And it had a pull-out bed. So she would be going down lobbying. My mother was very frugal. She spent the league's funds very judiciously, okay? And it had a pull-out bed. And so she would lobby all day. She'd come back at 9, had a little microwave and a little mini fridge. She'd fix, whatever the little dinner was. She wakes up, she always would wake up really early. And she'd make everything up. And she'd heat up her croissants and coffee. It basically put everything back into its closet so it looked like nobody had been there. She never took advantage of people or organizations or anything else like that. I mean, she would try to be as efficient a worker as she possibly could. I think the one thing that both my brother and I learned, my brother's a doctor, was to value each person and to try to never, if possible, and I'm not nearly as good as she was at this, to ever um, I guess, denigrate people. You can discuss ways in which you disagree with them or discuss ways you wish their behavior was different. But she never really, even if she was violently in disagreement with something, would not denigrate people. But she would be a forceful advocate for her position. And I remember when I was a kid, I must have done that a couple of times, and she kind of admonished me, and that was kind of her example, right? So, because she would never do that, she felt that every person had worth. The other thing is, she always viewed her as being for the underdog, and that tends to kind of put people at different levels the way you view them, but she tried to help the people and I guess however you want to define it, that could use help to kind of raise up, whatever that was. It'd be, back then, don't forget, they didn't have real equal rights. So she worked on, maternal health care. She worked for equal pay. So, that sort of things. And I'm not saying women are underdogs per se, but they were, if you look at the way that they were treated by the law. Same thing, kids. Texas was way deficient at that point in time in terms of free lunch programs, chips, all those things. She raised it up, and that's unfortunately been on the downturn in the last few years, which is a shame. But those were people that she thought needed help to come up, however you want to define that. And I think not trying to support the underdog and trying not to be dismissive of others and their opinions, which in this day and time is really difficult. But I think those were, I don't know if a specific example, but I think those were kind of the quality traits. She was incredibly compassionate. I mean, she took this stuff personally. It wasn't just it wasn't an idealistic, abstract goal. I mean, she went out there and worked, with folks hand in hand. It's not just policy stuff and legislative stuff. I mean, she was out there, fixing up boxes at the food bank, and she marched in protest. I mean, she was hands-on. I think I think she had always been interested in encouraging civic discourse and encouraging participation by as many people as possible in the civic discourse of the country. And one of the main ways you do that is by voting. Voting is, constitutionally one of our 4 or 5, biggest obligations, responsibilities, and privileges, right? So I think she just viewed that as being a fundamental piece that should be addressed, that kind of led to these other things. And I think the league was in a really good position then and had really strong leadership at the local level. And so I think that's what attracted her. I was a little kid, right? But I can only assume it would be she met 3 or 4 or 5 folks, and they kind of said, would you like to get involved with this? And I don't know exactly why that would have triggered. The league was the first one. I mean, the league was kind of the catalyst that started her, I think, on this path to doing all these other great things for people in all these different organizations. And I think that was kind of what drew her to that. I was reading one of the things. She was she was chair of the Texas Commission on Women. She got appointed by the governor and confirmed by the Senate to a variety of state agencies. But she also was the chair of the Texas Commission on the Humanities, or Texas Committee on the Humanities. And she headed up a task force to prepare a curriculum for elementary school and middle school students. My recollection is to encourage them to participate more actively civically. So she was able to kind of start with the league and then blossom out into all these other organizations that had similar goals. And so I think that's kind of the, I don't know if it's the fire. I'm going to use the catalyst because that sounds a little bit better. But I think that it was probably a combination of the league had, and almost all of her good friends were in the league. And were there for decades. I mean, it wasn't a short-term deal. I mean, and so it was a place that she really felt comfortable with. It had the ideals that were important to her. It had a support group, particularly for someone who moved to a town that they didn't know anybody, right? And I think that just was the perfect fit for her. Obviously, she would not be happy with the way that civic discourse is going. And I think the part about voter suppression and severe gerrymandering and the courts being elected and not necessarily being equitable or applying the law the way that maybe it should be, she would be very upset with all those things. And I'm trying not to necessarily lay blame, but at the current state of affairs, I believe she would find probably to be untenable. And so the question becomes, what do you do, right? So you either give up and you throw your hands in the air and you walk, or you say it's worth fighting for. And I'm trying not to get into the partisan piece here. I think as a system, it's worth fighting for. And I think the system right now is out of whack, and it doesn't allow easy access to the ballot box. It doesn't give people comfort that they can vote in secrecy and their vote will be counted. There won't be any pressure put on them. All of those things that should make a democracy work, I think, are threatened. And I'm not sure how she would be much more creative than me, try to figure out a way to unravel that. But I think she would not give up. If you give up hope, what do we have left? So again, she was used to fighting, long odds kind of deals. You don't win all the long odds deals, right? How do we all try to find a role that helps to achieve positive objectives? Some people, it is being an office holder. For others, it's being a school teacher, teaching civics. It can be a whole bunch of different opportunities. It's hard at this point in the world to make a difference with one person, but I think the goal would be to get enough like-minded people, and the league, I think, does that, who think it is important that we have full civic discourse, that we have people allowed to speak their opinions without fear of retribution, that they be allowed access freely to the ballot box. I think all of those things are important issues for the league, and so hopefully they can help take that step and figure out how to do those coalitions and help to make it happen. The league is rare because it does have a reputation of, I'll say, of being non-biased with regards to who runs for office. The key is, I think the league has a lot of respect for the voter guide and asking good questions, tough questions, and printing whatever's put in there. I think her feeling was that she recognized that all of these groups she's involved with depend upon fundraising. And she helped to administer funds for different groups for part of their mission. So it's not like she thought that things just ran on thin air. The needs were a lot different back then. You didn't have, I don't know how to put it, you didn't need big media campaigns and big funding for, huge initiatives and stuff. It was just different, different approach on a larger scale than it used to be, which kind of makes sense. The world's bigger now, right? And things cost more now than they did back then. People recognize the system's broken. Okay, what are some ways to start the process to try to repair some of that brokenness? And how can funding help with that process? Help to get people re-engaged, to get people to recognize that access to the ballot box is just critical. And to shut it out for partisan reasons may help in the short term to achieve a victory, but it's long term, it's going to have a huge adverse impact. For me, asking me to just donate money without having some kind of thought process about how that money is going to be used and what's the goal and how to achieve that. And you may or may not, but at least thinking that through, that to me is important. And for a lot of my friends too. I think some people just, can cut a check and just not really care where it goes. Well, they care where it goes, but they don't really, and you can't really micromanage the funding once the, organization receives it, and that's not fair to them, right? It seems to me that, politics has always been competitive, but now it's a blood sport. And I think it's win at all costs. And I hate to say what's in it for me, but I'm going to kind of say that. And that's why I think trying to unravel that is going to be incredibly hard. Incredibly hard. That kind of goes back to, if you give up hope, what do we have left, right? So, but people don't want to, throw good money after bad.